Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Okay, so we're continuing on here in our series through the book of Hebrews, and we're now coming to chapter 2, verses 5 through 9, the next section, basically on Jesus's suffering and glorification, which explores the incarnation and exaltation, and mainly focusing on the incarnation and its the author's way of explaining some unfinished business back in chapter 1, verse 4, where it said that he became so much greater than the angels. So that relative clause there needs to be explained and explored, and that's what this particular unit will do. So coming to it, in this particular session that I'm gonna test your patience. We're going to go through a lot of different commentators because they all have some bit of contribution that I think is important for you to see, and then in typical fashion, we're just going to peruse through them and kind of combine their thoughts into our own here. So Harold Attridge, coming to the unit, these are his initial thoughts, which I think are fairly sound. You can be the judge. After the hortatory interlude, our author returns to exposition. Up to this point, he has focused on the majesty of the Son, God's instrument in creation, who is now enthroned in majesty. But the story of the Son encapsulated in the opening verses is not simply one of glory. Central to that story is the priestly act by which he made expiation for sins. Giving an interpretation of that part of the Son's story will occupy much of Hebrews. The author introduces the theme in the remainder of chapter 2 by focusing clearly on the incarnation. The chapter, then, is not a digression, but an essential step in the development of Hebrews' Christological and paranetic program. The argument begins exegetically with the citation of Psalm 8 and a Christological interpretation. The exegesis suggests that the Son, who has been shown to be superior to the angels, was made subject to them. The author will also indicate the reason for that subjugation, that it was part of the divine plan of salvation. And basically, he's capturing theologically some important points here, especially in the first paragraph. And he's just basically right on here, and that this is a development focusing on incarnational theology. So this is how we start off, and this is very, very excellent. Okay, so coming here, we're looking here at this particular slide because he didn't submit the coming world here, hypotassin, to angels. He didn't do that. With the quotation here in the dative, it's submitted to us, with obviously with Christ included here, really with him as the principal subject of the interpretation, and then we would be his partakers or shares with him, his partners in the kingdom. Christ is the king. So this is what Luke Timothy Johnson was trying to underline here, that the gar here, for here, he did not submit the coming world to angels, but it's submitted to humanity. And as we look at this, Christ is going to be, because since he becomes a man, then he's a part of humanity. So if whether we speak of humanity in the interpretation, the Christological interpretation here, you can't exclude Christ because Christ became a man. And it's all going to be principally his interpretation concerns both redeemed humanity and Christ. So that's the point that Luke Timothy Johnson was trying to make. Very, very important. On here, we'll come here to Oberholzer, who really has some of my sentiments here, and I wanted to include his thoughts. With the word gar, the writer proceeded to clinch the exhortation in verses 1 to 4. As the new revelation is not mediated through angels, so they, the believers, also are not to glorify the angels. The author clarified that the angels are not the ones who will rule the world to come, only the Son and his companions will reign. The phrase tein oikumenein, tein melusan, the world to come, is eschatological, referring to the millennial kingdom. As already stated, Hebrews 2:5 indicates that the topic under discussion is eschatological. Verse 8 clarifies that the present age is not the kingdom age, for all things have not yet been placed in subjection to the Son. It is therefore impossible to understand as being realized now. According to the book of Hebrews, the rule and reign of Christ with his companions is an eschatological event. Exactly. So this is why I wanted to highlight what Dr. Oberholzer here had to say, and he's done a fantastic job. I'm commending this to you. And he's got this in an article, The Eschatological Salvation in Hebrews, in Bibliotheca Sacra. I think it's a Dallas thing over there at that particular seminary. According to the book of Hebrews, the rule and reign of Christ with his companions is an eschatological event. The salvation in 2:3 is the same as that is in 1:14. Hebrews 2:5 clarifies that the salvation under discussion is eschatological. So he's tying up all the knots and really crystallizing our thoughts theologically. And I wholeheartedly agree here with this interpretation. Okay, coming here to De Silva, I'm telling you, I have a parade here of scholars, but they all have something very, very important to add. Everybody has something to add to the interpretation, and De Silva, this is great. This is awesome. Listen to what he has to say. Another interesting aspect of the author's interpretation of the psalm is that it applies not to the present age, as the psalm most assuredly did for its pre-Christian readers, but to the next age or the coming world. In the author's terminology, the underlying logic of his hermeneutic may run thus: universal subjection is not yet an observable reality, but no word of Scripture proves ultimately invalid if it is not true for this age. It will be true for the coming age. So he just basically told us that when we come to Psalm 8, it's an eschatological interpretation. So the world being put underneath the feet, all things are not submitted. Hypotassin is not submitted underneath his feet. So this is what he's talking about, and so I wanted to show you this. For he did not hypotaxe here in this particular text. He did not submit the coming world to angels, concerning which we speak. So he's giving the eschatological rendition, and we did see Oberholzer said a little bit about this, but we'll continue. Okay, coming here to Dr. Ellis, the use of Psalm 8:6 and Psalm 110:1 presents similar phenomena with midrashic techniques. Hebrews 2:6-9 establishes for the believer in Jesus' resurrection that Psalm 8 finds its fulfillment not in man in general, but in Jesus. In 2 Corinthians 15:27, this understanding of Psalm 8 and Psalm 110 is assumed, and that the exposition is restricted to the meaning of all things that are subjected to Jesus. The allusions to Psalm 8 and 110 in Ephesians 1:20 and 22 apply texts to Jesus as though the interpretation were self-evident. So, what Ellis is trying to say here is that Psalm 8, when we come to it, is going to be a midrashic interpretation, which, to use, to even go back to, to our to De Silva or to Oberholzer, it's an eschatological or as at the beginning, Attridge, it's a Christological interpretation, but it's a Christological eschatological interpretation. So now when you come to Psalm 8, remember it says, he did not he did not subject the coming world which we are speaking to angels. So that sets up his interpretive enterprise here. That's eschatologicalizes the interpretation. So now the author went by introducing the psalm with this formulaic statement. He's eschatologically is going to interpret Psalm 8 Christologically. So this is what Ellis is saying, and he's saying that he's using midrashic exegesis on this, and so this was part of what my doctoral dissertation was all about. That was published by Brill. Joel's use of Scripture. It's you appropriate a Scripture and then you resignify it. So that's what's going on here. It's the appropriation and resignification of Scripture. And the author told us exactly what he was doing. He was talking about the coming world. And then he gives a Christological interpretation. And this is what Ellis is trying to say, and what the others have said as well. So our author in verse 5 uses hypotexin here in order to frame the unit in verses 5-9, so as to wed its use in Psalm 8:8 in connection with placement under one's feet, which midrashically ties back to Psalm 110 from the previous context. Let's look at this. And you have submitted all things underneath his feet. This is Psalm 8.
sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. So what else is trying to say, and most, we'll see here that Lane does, is that the author is picking up on upotassin here, and tying it to Psalm 8, and how it stretches back to Psalm 110. And this is something that we would call, I think, Gezerah Shava. It's another midrashic rule of interpretation from Hillel, which means the same law, or the equal law, which it's a law of analogy, and typically using a word, which here becomes for us upotassin. This becomes the word where he ties Psalm 8 back here to Psalm 110, or with the phrase, submitting things underneath one's feet. So this is how they make this midrashic complex, like Paul did in 1 Corinthians 15, is that he combined both scriptures, Psalm 8 and 110 together, and that's called a Monrashik Complex. It's the combination of two or three scriptures or more in one verse, and it's doing it through words or a phrase here, and that's the rule of Gezerah Shava, and this is what's midrashically going on here. The unit also explains the incarnational language of Christ having become so much greater than the angels in 1:4, which was never explained scripturally, but now is with the citation of Psalm 8. The passage is further tied together by the use of tein oikumenein tein meluson in verse 5, which goes back to 1:6, which deals with the salvation that's yet to come. There you go, in 1:14 and 2:3. So it's all tied together there, and it's wonderful. It's beautiful when you see what's going on here. Coming here to Koester, this is an excellent author, Luther Seminary up there in St. Paul. He says, on the basis of the argument, or the basis for the argument is established through the quotation of Psalm 8, 4-6, a text that speaks of the glory of God intended for human beings. First, the quotation provides a common ground with listeners whom the author assumes will regard the psalm as a sacred text. Second, the psalm allows the author to address their situation in a complex fashion. A tension in the psalm enables it to bear two different lines of interpretation. So he's thinking Christologically, both of which will be utilized by the author. The psalm asks about God's will for man, which can be understood as a question about humankind generally, so that Hebrews can deal with God's design for people. The psalm can also be taken as a statement about Jesus, who is God's Son and heir of all things. Psalm 110 and Hebrews 1:13 said that God told the Son that he would make his enemies a footstool for his feet. Since Psalm 8:7 used very similar language to declare that God had placed all things under the feet of the Son of Man, listeners might well assume that both texts referred to Jesus. Hebrews will develop both senses so that the listeners can see in Jesus the fulfillment of God's purposes in a manner that anticipates and brings about the salvation of others. Just excellent. All these authors have their own unique contribution, and I wanted to present Koester here to you. Really did an excellent job. Okay, coming to Lane. The exposition assumes the form of homiletical midrash, in which key phrases of an extended quotation are taken up and expounded for the hearers. The development in the initial paragraph is tied together by the wordplay on υποτασσειν, to subject, subordinate, and its derivatives. This is really cool. The declaration that it was not to angels that God had subjected υποτασσειν. This is υποτασσεin here. This is just an aorist. And the world to come anticipates the use of the same verbal form in the climactic refrain in Psalm 187. You subjected, that is, hypotaxos, all things under his feet. This, in turn, provides the writer with the key. This is the key, the Gezerah Shava, type of interpretation, midrashic, to the interpretation of the entire quotation. Now, I'm putting everything in subjection, for in subjecting to him, he left nothing out of his control. This here is out of his control, or unsubmitted. On hypotakton, this is still a derivative of hypotassein here. But in fact, we do not see everything subject to his control. Hypotetag mena. So this is going to be the perfect participle passive here that we see that the author uses in his interpretation of hypotassein. Same word, but it's just put in a perfect participle. The repetition with variation in the form is rhetorically effective. It introduces an element of suspense, which is not relieved until the emphatic and deferred statement of verse 9. This is really cool. But we see Jesus. So he is going to say that this deferred statement here, verse 9, is where he begins to make his interpretation of the Christological interpretation, and he's right on this. And this is great. Okay, we're almost done with this parade, but we got to put in Buchanan in here. He's an older past scholar. The expression translated "world to come" is the Greek oikumene, he melusa, and then he gives a Syriac alma David, which is the equivalent of the Hebrew olam haba, the age to come, the world to come, or the age to come. Do not refer to heaven, as some have thought. Westcott recognized this years ago, so he picked up on this, that the old bishop Westcott was right. The phrase is not to be understood simply of the future life, or more generally of heaven. Now, this is exactly what most typical scholars are, how they're going about interpreting this. So I want you to get back to the millennial interpretation, which Buchanan is going to subscribe to, even though he may not even believe it. The phrase is not to be understood simply of the future life, or more generally of heaven. To be still more specific, the world to come was the Messianic age, the time when the Romans would be subdued and the Messiah would rule as king from his throne in Jerusalem. Since the world to come was to be an administration, oikumene, during which the Messiah would reign, it follows that the age would be subject to the Messiah or Son, not to angels. The task of the angels was to minister to those who were about to inherit salvation in the age to come. The Son, on the contrary, was to rule. So what he's trying to say is he's trying to get back to looking at this the way it was originally understood in the first century, and not through, medieval theology developing with the reformers. And so he's just trying to get all of the, the reformed eschatology out of the way, and get back to the Bible, get back to how Jesus and how the first century Christianity of the canon interpreted as the apostles. So that's basically what's going on here, and he's trying to emphasize that. Coming here to an Old Testament scholar looking how the New Testament uses this psalm. We'll go through this, try to go through this quickly. In the New Testament, the apostles point out that because of the presence of sin, mankind has not ruled over God's creation as intended. Creation is not in submission, but in chaos. The message of the New Testament explains how this plan will be fulfilled. By the incarnation, the Son of God took upon mortal flesh and was made a little lower than the angels. He never ceased being divine, but he did empty himself to become the second Adam. Even though all dominion and authority has been given to him, we do not yet see all things put underneath his feet. That will happen at the end of the age. Paul emphasizes that he will not simply put created life under his feet. He will subdue things visible and invisible, and the last enemy that he will subdue will be death. Those who trust in the Lord will share in that dominion, for they will reign with him, Revelation 5:11. Then the human race will fulfill its destiny in and through the new Adam. So this was very good. He's looking at this interpretation as incarnational, and he's going back, and he is definitely looking at 1:4. At how Jesus became greater than the angels. That was because he was made a little lower than the angels. So Alan here is highlighted. Okay, so what I want to do here is let's look at the text. What is man, that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man, that you visit him? You have made him a little lower than the angels, and you crowned him with glory and honor, and you have put all things underneath his feet. And then it says, for in submitting to him all things, he left nothing to him that was unsubmitted. But now we do not yet see all things having been submitted to him. But, okay, now this is where this delayed reaction, okay, the delayed interpretation, because in Greek you can throw words all over the sentence because everything is, we got nouns that are in declension, and verbs that are decline. So here in verse 9 it says, but we see Jesus, who has been made a little lower than the angels, on account of the suffering of death, having been crowned with glory and honor, so that by the grace of God he might taste death, thanatou, huper pantos, for all. So this is the quotation, and then this becomes the interpretation. And really, he doesn't give the Christological interpretation until verse 9. he in here in verse 8b, he still has humanity in view, but you can't speak when you come to Psalm 8 here. Jesus has become a man, so Jesus is a part of humanity. So you can't ever take Jesus is always in the picture here in verse 8b, because he's part of the human picture as well. But he becomes the second Adam, as going back there to Ross Allen, and so the interpretation, what he did. This is a psalm of it's like a creation psalm where and it's an interpretation going back to Genesis 1, where God, had, Adam and Eve rule over, the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and the animals, and everything. They were made to rule over everything, and still are. I mean, this is still going on now, but we can see from humanity's point of view that man has never been able to rule the world in a just manner. It's nothing but bloodshed through wars and kingdoms, and so. But that was God's design for humanity, and still is the mandate for us as humans. What's our purpose? We're to rule over the earth. That's what God that's what God mandated for humanity, But we'll see that this is fulfilled really in Christ. And then that the millennial reign, the purpose of the millennial reign is that the original creation never was able to enjoy its intended purpose for God creating it. It was marred by the fall of Adam and Eve, and Cain being a murderer right away. We had death entered the world, and it's been a mess ever since. And so the purpose of the millennium is that so that creation can enjoy how, it says that all creation is groaning, waiting for the revelation of the sons of God. This is Paul in Romans 8. This is central to New Testament theology, is the millennial reign, and you just take the millennial reign and just drop it into Ezekiel, into Zechariah, into Isaiah, into Psalm 2, into Psalm 110. All these scriptures, Psalm 45, the where he quoted from the wedding psalm, where the Lord said to God's what was that? Well, it's just referring to Jesus as God, that your God has thy God has anointed thee with the oil of gladness above your companions. So Christ is specifically called God, but he's a king, and he's going to rule. And there's a wedding feast. This is all typical language that the New Testament picks up on and eschatologicalizes. And this is how I'm interpreting this. And I think it fits the original way it was to be interpreted. And you don't want to... Amillennialism wasn't created until hundreds and hundreds of years after the New Testament was written. So don't follow these kinds of things. Just follow the biblical text. Okay, and last point here, one of the last points that we haven't picked up on that O'Brien stated that you need to be aware of is in 2:5 here, following his solemn warning of verses 1 to 4, The author resumes his exposition and gives a further reason for stressing the superiority of Christ to the angels. Although God had entrusted the administration of the present world to angels, okay, although God has entrusted the administration of the present world to angels, he has not done this in relation to the heavenly world to come. Very important statement. The biblical evidence for the angelic administration of the world goes back to the Song of Moses, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, he established boundaries for the nations according to the number of the angels of God. So this is the Septuagint reading. Our author only uses the Septuagint text. This shapes the theology of the early church, and certainly this was in the minds of the believers of the first century. This reading implies that the administration of the nations had been parceled out among a number of angelic powers. The establishment of boundaries for the nations according to the number of the angels of God implies that the nations of the world had been subjected to angels. And that goes back to what Coaster was saying, was back in the very first slide, in the second paragraph at the end. Later, in the Old Testament and literature of Second Temple Judaism, this implication becomes explicit. So this is talking about, like in Daniel, that that Michael was fighting with the prince of Persia and Greece, and then Paul said that we fight not against flesh, but against principalities, powers, Pantocrator, world powers of darkness. In spiritual wickedness in high places. So he's just trying to say that God has, God is ruling, obviously, but he's using angels. And when you read the book of Revelation, you've got angels over the water, you got the angels over the trees, you got, the angels are all set up on the earth protecting things, and they Christ has administered that they serve in certain capacities. That when you read the book of Revelation, it will become clear to you that God is using the administration of angels. But in the age to come, remember, Paul said that we are going to judge angels. This is going back to 1 Corinthians 6. So this picks up on this window that in the age to come, the shoe's going to be on the other foot here for redeemed humanity and angels. There's going to be a different relationship. So Peter O'Brien is picking up on this, and we know from Qumran. Cave 4 that they found this interpretation here with B'nai Elohim. They found this particular Hebrew reading that would support the angels of God, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. So there was a 4Q32 fragment that had this reading in Deuteronomy 32:8, and so you'll see. I think even some of the ESV may even translate B'nai Elohim, sons of God, there, which supports the Septuagint reading here, and underscores what Brian is trying to say here, is that in the phrase, for he did not submit the coming world to angels. Well, it implies, if this was your Bible here, okay, the LXX, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he established their boundaries for the nations according to the number of the angels of God. Well, there you go. There's the world set up according to the administration of angels. So this is the background, and this is the reason for him even saying, for he did not submit the coming world to angels. Okay, well then who's going to administer that? Well, it's the believers. You and I. Remember, if a good faithful servant, you were faithful over 5 cities. I'll give you 10. Okay, so this is what it's all about. Okay, it's all about us inheriting what's to come, and there are rewards for believers. Remember, we all have to stand before the bema seat of Christ, not for salvation, but for rewards. Everything that we've done down here there's going to be a big bonfire. It's all going to be thrown into it. If something comes out, then you got a reward and you got something. So, based on that, will be how God situates you in the world to come and your responsibilities. It's based upon your obedience down here. Sorry to tell you that, but you need to if you have never been taught that, you've got a horrible pastor. This is 2 Corinthians 5. We must all stand before the bema seat of Christ. So we're all going to be evaluated, all of us. So it behooves you that we need to obey. If today you hear His voice, don't harden your heart. Okay, that's the language of Hebrews. Okay, so when we come here to the actual MT text, what is man that you are mindful of him, and Ben Adam, the son of Adam, literally the son of man, that you visit him? You have caused him to be me'at me Elohim. You have caused him. Typically, we translate chasar as lack, but here you have made him to be a little lower than God. Okay, so that's the reading in this in the Masoretic text. But when the Septuagint came, we've seen this before, that sometimes when the MT text has Elohim, they're going to translate it by angeloi, and here they do, so that God made him, that's humanity, okay, a little lower than the angels, and that this here then becomes the whole. This verse 6 here is the genesis. This is how the author views Christ's incarnation. It's all from this Christological reading of this text. And since Christ became a man, this is the logic of the author of Hebrews, why he can now interpret this, because Christ is human, became a human. Remember, Christ is still human. He just has a glorified body, and that glorified body is greater than an angel, just like what we're going to have. We're going to have a glorified body when we see him at the, when Christ returns to the earth. That's when we'll get a glorified body at a second coming. So this reading here is typical for the Septuagint, and then the author of Hebrews, since his community are fully enmeshed in the Greco-Roman Empire, they're reading the Septuagint text. And remember, we're locating the readers here of the book of Hebrews to be Roman Jews who have resettled in the capital, Rome, or somewhere within the Pauline circle of his missionary work, and Rome has been suggested as the typical place for the writing of the readers of this particular epistle. So anyhow, this is just the typical way. We saw this for in 4Q32 for what was it, the text. Excuse me here, I have to go through. I did something. I don't know what I did, but there we go. Hopefully it stays there. Then we'll go back. Okay. No. There we go. Boy, I don't know what I did, but I did something here to this thing, and it's a little scary. Sorry about that. To go back to the Psalm interpretation for 1:6, let all the angels of God worship Him. We found that in that Hebrew text that came from Qumran that we mentioned in the previous slide over when we did 5 through 14, and it's used in Odes 243. It's an appendum of the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, at the end of the Psalter in the Greek Septuagint. You'll find it there. So that reading there is preserved, and it was found also in that 4Q 32 fragment. Okay. Now, most scholars will tell you that here in verse 7 is omitted from the newer manuscripts that our New Testament texts are based on, so what are we going to do with this? So I put down here that it was abbreviated, this particular line. You caused him to rule over the works of your hand, and then in Greek, then you appointed him over the works of your hands. That's how they're going to take the hivhil here of mashal. So that you have appointed him. It's abbreviated for the focus on the last line here. This last line being, you have submitted all things underneath his feet. Abbreviated for confusion, who was set over the works of God's hands. This could cause confusion with Christ, the creator of the world, in 1, 2, and 12. But remember there, it's the means. Jesus was the means through which God created the world. So it doesn't really take away from that. This line could be included. It's in your in the Hebrew, or it's in our English versions in the King James. Here it has the plain A reading, abbreviated for Christological reading of the text. So there's manuscripts where this line is omitted, and where it also is included. So the King James version is going to have it. I don't have a problem with it being there or not there. It doesn't take away from the reading of the text. Our author chose to focus his attention on two places: that man was made a little lower than the angels, okay, and that he was crowned with glory and honor. That's going to take up the Christ's incarnation and exaltation, and that you submitted all things under his feet, which ties back into Psalm 110. That this is, Christ is now seated at the right hand of God, waiting for God to submit all things underneath his feet. So this is the present age that we're in, where God is doing that, and it will have its complete fulfillment in the book Revelation, or at the second coming. when God brings the present age to a close, and we'll have the age to come, the world to come. So this is the coming salvation that we're all looking forward to. Okay, so these are some of the differences between the readings in the Hebrew text, and then the Septuagint, and then in the book of Hebrews. So the book of Hebrews pretty much is following the Septuagint here, and pretty faithfully, and this here is something that needs to be talked about, that you caused him to be a little lower than God. That would be our reading from the Masoretic text in our Hebrew Bibles, but this is interpreted. The Elohim here are interpreted as angels, and that's typical for the Septuagint to do that with these texts where they're talking about divine beings, and it's not talking specifically about God. But some of these become controversial. But the Septuagint did this. The New Testament vouchsafes the Septuagint's reading. So now for us looking back here to Me Elohim, we need to enlarge our understanding that what he meant by that was angels. So this is where we're at. This is how we roll. Okay, coming here to our last author, New Testament author. We'll save the best for last almost. David Allen has done a good job. After establishing the superiority of the Son, chapter 1, the author explained how it is that Jesus was made a little lower than the angels via the incarnation for the purpose of the cross. The coming of the Son to earth to accomplish redemption was a descent from the heavenly to the earthly sphere. And since angels inhabit the heavenly sphere, the incarnation involved Jesus becoming for a little while lower than the angels. Jesus was superior to the angels from eternity by virtue of his deity. He temporarily became lower than the angels by leaving the heavenly sphere to come to earth to accomplish his salvific work. And as a result of the accomplishment of his work, he has been exalted by God to the right hand of the throne in heaven, where he has received the inheritance of the name. So he did a very good job, and it explains back here in Hebrews 1:4, just talking of Jesus having become so much greater than the angels, as much as he has inherited a superior name than they. So this is how we are to interpret this. And David Allen, one little caveat here is that Jesus never ceased being man. He has a glorified body. Remember, he's the first fruits of the resurrection. And then those that is coming, that is the second coming. So what we need to see here is that Jesus is in a glorified human body, and that when we see him, we'll be like him. We're not going to be God, but we're going to have our glorified body, and we will now be administering this particular world that we're on. Christ will be ruling from Jerusalem, and we will be ruling on this earth it's like it'll be like going back to the Garden of Eden. This is return to Eden, and that we'll enjoy 1,000 years of peace. And when Isaiah said they'll beat their swords into plowshares, and the nations will go up to Jerusalem. Let us go walk in the light of the Lord. Let us get our ruling from God, and have our grievances meted out for us by the judge in Jerusalem. So that's Isaiah 2 and Micah, and you just can't just spiritualize that stuff away. It's meant to be real, and it is going to be real. So David Allen's picking up on this, so understanding that he takes a temporal view of this. I don't take a temporal view. He's still man. He's just, the body that he assumed is now different, is glorified. Okay, so this come down here to the interpretation. So the author here quotes the Septuagint, and then his interpretation. For in subjecting to him all things, he left nothing to him that was unsubmitted, that was not submitted. This verbal adjective here. Anupatokton here, which comes from hypotassein. Okay, so what are we going to say here? So let's look here at this 8b here as talking about humanity in general. Okay, for in submitting all things to him, he left nothing that was not submitted. Now, this is just to us as humans. This is what God did, okay? But now we do not yet see all things having been submitted. Okay, so this is the temporal sense, okay? We don't see all things having been submitted. That's to us, or this is our present reality. Okay, remember, it's all about us now. Remember, this is the way we need to look here. Luke Timothy Johnson, I think, was the one who said this. We need to look at our present situation. This is really all about us. Are we going to be, the companions of Christ? Are we going to submit to Christ and be a part of this salvation? But we who have done that, when we look around, we can see that the world's in a mess. Okay, so we're in this in-between time when God is submitting all things underneath Christ's feet and he's exalted, and we're living in this inaugurated kingdom that's been inaugurated. We taste of the powers of the age to come, but we don't live in it. So that's kind of where we're at. So we don't see all things being submitted underneath us. It's not going to be. It's Christ is going to be the one who brings this about. And we can see this incarnational theology then here beginning in verse 9, a Christological interpretation. So look at verse 8b as we are to look at this from the human point of view, but you can never ever take Christ out of this because he became human too. So it's both here. It's both. Verse 8b is talking about humans and Christ. Since Christ became human, he has to be a part of this. But the real focus of the Christological interpretation doesn't take place until here. But in what he says here, the way we have to go about this in English, we've got to read all of this, but we see Jesus, okay, having been made a little lower than the angels. Okay, so this here then becomes the incarnation, and that explains 1:4 why how is it that he became so much greater than the angels? Well, I thought he was God. How can you become something that you're supposed to how can you become something? How can you become greater if you're God? Well, it's because it's the redemptive activity of how God decided to save us when he gave man free will. That was a very dangerous thing. It cost him his life. So by giving free will, man chose to make their own decisions and rebel. So Christ had become man in order to redeem us and lived a perfect sinless life, and this is how he gained our redemption. So Christ took on the form of a man, going back to Philippians, and this is the kenosis theory here of the author of Hebrews, but we see Jesus having been made a little lower than the angels. Now this is causal here, but on account of the suffering of death, having been crowned with glory and honor. So these phrases here of elatomenon and esthephanomenon, okay, here, having been crowned and having been made a little lower, these are parallel statements, and explaining the incarnation, and then the causal statement, but on account of the suffering of death, he was then crowned with glory and honor. So if you go back to the MT reading of this, you can obviously see that verse 9 here is a Christological reading of the text and not a literal reading of the poetry of Psalm 8, having been made a little lower than the angels, he crowned him with glory and honor. So it's just talking about how man is elevated. We are the apex of Genesis 1. We're the apex. We were the last thing created. We were the reason for everything. We're to rule over everything. So we were made just a little lower than the angels, but we're crowned with glory and honor as humanity. But we lost this vis-a-vis the fall. And so now Jesus became a man, and this is being Christologically interpreted for the incarnation. And then he adds this prepositional phrase, dieta pathema, to thanatou, on account of the suffering of death. That's not a part of the text. This was added in to explain then how Christologically he was crowned with glory and honor. It was vis-a-vis his death, and then the purpose clause at the end here, the purpose of the incarnation, was to vouchsafe by the grace of God that he tasted death for everyone. So this is important here. So the teaching here of verses 5 to 9 explains the incarnation here of how Jesus became so much greater than the angels. Goes back to that. That was something left unspoken of in the previous chain of verses. So remember, this is the continued scriptural basis for Christ's superiority over the angels, verses 1 to 5, is focusing on suffering and glory. So part of the suffering, though, is that he had to become a man, and that by becoming a man, he took on the role of a priest to atone for our sins by living a sinless life. He was crowned with glory and honor, and all things were put all things are going to be put in submission under his feet at his second coming, okay? And that's Psalm 110, Psalm 2, okay? So there's something here, that Christ is going to rule over, It's down here. It's not up there. He's going to be ruling here in Jerusalem at his second coming, and that's when he begins his rule. So you need to look at Ephesians 1, 20 and 22, and 1 Corinthians 15. These explain more fully from a Pauline sense of what's going on here. But hopefully this has been enlightening, and okay, we'll catch you on the next one.